Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in Salesforce FX Hour. My name is Amit Chaudhary. I'm your host, and today we are going to talk about Salesforce strategy design, how you can implement that in your org. And we have a special guest, Brian, with us. So let me hand over him for his introduction and the presentation.
Hey, Amit, thanks a lot for having me on. Really excited to be here. So this is our second session on Salesforce strategy design. Our first session was kind of giving an overview of what strategy design is and talking about the Salesforce strategy design certification, the new certification that was launched in 2022. This session, we're going to talk about how we can take some of the strategy design concepts and methods and start to introduce them into your organization. So a little bit of background about me. I am 12x certified Salesforce architect. I have the Salesforce strategy designer certification. I've been an independent Salesforce consultant for 10 years, self-employed, and I've been doing building CRM systems on the technical side for about 18 years. You can find me on Twitter here, and you can find me on LinkedIn here. Definitely reach out if you're on either or both of those platforms. Okay, so like I mentioned, this is the second of two sessions. Yesterday, we kind of did an overview of what strategy design is, and we talked about the certification, how to study for it, how the exam works, all that. Today, we're going to kind of go back over, do a quick summary of the benefits of strategy design, why it could be valuable to your work and to your organization. And then we're going to talk about if you are relatively new to these concepts, or if your organization is relatively new to some of these concepts and methods, we're going to talk about some of the challenges of introducing strategy design concepts that you could run into in your organizations. And then we'll talk about some techniques for introducing strategy design at your organization. So let's talk about the benefits. As I discussed in session one, we went over the fact that strategy design is a set of methods and tools, and it's really focused on understanding our stakeholders' needs and building better solutions for them. And when I say stakeholders, that's a general term, and it refers to many different types of stakeholders. We could be talking about end users, internal end users. We could talk about external customers or clients. We could be talking about leadership and kind of project sponsors. Stakeholders refers to many different various groups. We talked yesterday about a big reason why IT projects in general and Salesforce projects, the failure is often tied to a lack of understanding of stakeholder needs. So not really totally and deeply understanding what our stakeholders are looking for. And then we build a solution. It might be a very high quality solution, but it doesn't address their underlying needs. And strategy design is a set of tools that really helps us in this space to better understand our stakeholders and what they need. And another piece that we talked about on yesterday's call is many people in the Salesforce space or in the IT space are familiar with business analysis and those kinds of analysis techniques. We talked a lot about how strategies design techniques are similar in some ways to those techniques, and in some ways they're different. So there's some concepts, if you're familiar with business analysis, that will be familiar, and there's some new things that strategy design will bring to the table. To kind of do a quick recap of what strategy design is, how you use it, and the benefits, I'm gonna do a quick review of a use case that we talked about yesterday. And it's kind of illustrative of where strategy design can play a role for your organization. So we talked about an example of a company, and they found that they have low engagement in the middle of their sales process. So they have a high number, a good volume of high quality leads coming in at quote unquote the top of the funnel. And they find that their close rate is also very healthy. So those are really good things. But they found in the middle of the sales process, for whatever reason, engagement is low and conversion rate is low. So that's the problem that our company is facing. The first thing that we talked about is that strategy design encourages us to view this problem from multiple stakeholders' perspectives. So we're not just looking at it from the perspective of us as salespeople or from our company's perspective. We're also looking at it from the perspective of our customers, or our clients or prospective clients, from the perspective of sales team members who might be working on this sales process, from sales management. We could even be looking at it from the perspective of company leadership, or even external partners, or even broader contextual stakeholders, external stakeholders beyond. So it encourages to look at it from multiple perspectives. So not just look at this problem from the perspective of us as salespeople, but how is this sales process not working for our customers and clients as well. So in terms of methods that we talked about yesterday that can help us with this problem, one of the methods we talked about was journey mapping, and how journey mapping can help us understand what's currently happening in this process, and where the challenges lie. So when we talked about journey mapping, a lot of folks on the call said, journey mapping sounds a lot like business process diagramming that we're already familiar with. And there's definitely overlap between journey mapping and some of the business process mapping concepts that you're already familiar with. One of the things that we said journey mapping brings to the table that you might not be doing now is to not only look at our process, our sales process, from the perspective of the functional steps that happen, and particularly the functional steps that happen as it relates to Salesforce, but to broaden the lens a little bit and to understand what happens from the perspective of our multiple stakeholders. So not just our salespeople, but also our customers and prospective customers and clients, et cetera. And also, what are they thinking, and what are they feeling during these process? Where are their struggles during this process? And to look at that in a more kind of systematic way, to include that in our diagram, so we can better understand not just the steps, but where people, our salespeople, our customers, et cetera, are running into challenges and frustrations. And then once we understand those frustrations, that can become kind of a rich source of ways to think about where we can improve it. So that brings us to the second topic of kind of a systematic approach to brainstorming solutions. So if we look at our problem as low engagement in the middle of the funnel, we can use something called how might we statements to look at that problem and then brainstorm different ways that we could solve it. So on the call yesterday, we did a quick how might we statement exercise around this, and we came out with a few different ways that we could address this challenge. More automated messages, right? So somebody comes in the top of the funnel. If there's lower engagement in the middle of the funnel, could more automated messaging help them? Think about Marketing Cloud, Pardot, something like that, where we're getting where we're sending out more messages. So that's a Salesforce solution. Another solution folks came up with was maybe we're already sending a lot of messaging out, but the content, the quality of the content that we're writing is not great. It's not high quality. So maybe it's a content issue. That's a second possible solution to this challenge. Maybe number 3, more outreach on the part of our salespeople. Maybe there's just a lack of outreach at this point in the process, and maybe that would help. Number 4, we had talked about maybe they're doing outreach, but they're not doing outreach at the right time or to the right to the right customers when they need, or prospective customers when they need outreach or support from a salesperson or relationship manager. And as an aside, we talked about ways that Salesforce could help bring some intelligence to that, so salespeople can target at the right time based on lead scoring or something like that. A couple other ideas that came up after the fact was, in some situations, we have different folks in the organization, salespeople who are closers, and we have salespeople that are setters, what's called. It's people that help set up or inform the prospects before the final stage when the close is happening or a contract is signed. So maybe it's an organizational thing where our salespeople need different skills or focuses so they can do a better job at the various stages. And one other idea that came up was, maybe we have an incentive structure where our salespeople aren't incentivized to focus on that setting or that middle of funnel or the nurture activities. So there was a number of different how might we statements that we came up with for how we could improve this situation. Some of them have to do with technology and Salesforce, some of them don't. But this activity of doing a journey map, seeing where the frustrations are, and then systematically kind of brainstorming solutions, or at least in a structured way, brainstorming solutions, allows us to be really clear about the outcome we're looking for, improving our funnel conversion rate and our engagement rate, to where the core challenge is, where is the customer running into frustration, where is our sales team potentially running into frustration, and really being clear about what we're going to deliver that will, in a very specific way, target that. So I am going to pause here for 1 sec. And Amit, I wanted to stop there and I wanted to ask you if you had any questions, because I know you weren't on the call yesterday. So what I've talked about so far, does it make sense? Do you have questions, or do you have any thoughts or feedback?
I'm good so far.
Okay, this all makes sense?
Yep.
Okay. So background information, as I mentioned, that was a quick 15-minute overview of kind of what we talked about yesterday. If you want to learn more about what we talked about yesterday, I would encourage you to check out either the session from yesterday on Apex Hours. Also, I wrote an article for Salesforce Ben on the Salesforce Strategy Designer certification, and yesterday's session was kind of based on that article. So if you want to just look at the article, that's another thing you can do. And also, there is a fantastic resource, What is Strategy Design and Why Does It Matter? It's written by Denise Burchell, who is at Salesforce. She's the Senior Director of Design. So she kind of really frames what strategy design is all about. So I'd encourage you to check out any and all of those resources. Okay, so we talked about the benefits, better understanding of our customers' needs, where the pain points are, where the frustrations are, and then bringing kind of a structured brainstorming ideation process to identify the best way to address those frustrations. So these tools in strategy design and the benefits are really powerful, but a lot of times when you're introducing new things to an organization, there's pushback. Change can be difficult, and it's not always a straight path to just introducing new concepts. So what I wanted to talk through now is what I've seen are some what I'll call anti-patterns in organizations. Anti-patterns are just patterns or dynamics that aren't working for us, that aren't effective, and some anti-patterns and how we can potentially address them, or at least be aware of them. So anti-pattern number one is gatekeepers. So one of the things we talked about with strategy design is it's multi-perspective, right? We're trying to get the perspectives of customers, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders. We are trying to get the perspective of multiple people within the organization. And we're also trying to bring a structured approach to how we can identify problems and address them. So the concept of gatekeepers within the organization, of having limited number of people who have access to information and limited numbers of perspectives, is an anti-pattern that we want to be aware of and hopefully improve upon. A couple of examples of kind of gatekeeper thinking is no ideation process. So when we talked about how might we statements and kind of a number of different people coming to the table and brainstorming in a somewhat structured way about how to solve problems. Many organizations don't do this. So there's no ideation process around problem solving. And a lot of times what this looks like is a few people or leadership dictating solutions to a development team or a delivery team sometimes based on data, sometimes based on sort of hunches and informal kind of experience. And what we want to do with strategy design methods is to break that open much more, bring it out into the open, allow more people to participate in a way that's based on data, qualitative and quantitative data, and a little bit more structured. So that's one example of gatekeeper thinking. Two is limited interaction with customers or users. So this is an example we've seen in organizations where things like only salespeople talk to the customers or only relationship managers talk to the customers. And often that can be a sign of information being very limited to one group of people. So as we talked about with strategy design, we're trying to understand our customers, our users in a very deep way. In order for that to happen, we need a lot of sharing around what the pain points of our users and our customers are. So obviously, particularly in bigger organizations, not everybody is going to be able to talk with, let's say, external customers in order to get direct conversation or direct feedback, but there are definitely tools and methods to kind of share that information and do a little bit more of a collaborative process than just having one team or one set of people sort of owning and gatekeeping feedback from the customers. In the last piece, organizational silos, similar to the one above, but a lot of times in the IT space or on Salesforce delivery teams, you hear things like the business in quotes versus IT or Salesforce IT in quotes. And it has sort of a us versus them or throw it over the wall type of dynamic. As we talked about, we want to break that down and we want to have a lot more sharing of information and collaboration. All of these gatekeeper dynamics can be a blocker for introducing strategy design. Number two, discovery is a waste of time. When are we going to start building? This is something we see in organizations. Maybe in the past, they've kind of had a waterfall type approach where their discovery and analysis happens up front, and then they're doing delivery for a while, and it feels like the discovery is not really effective and it's just a waste of time before you launch something. Often this happens from kind of failed projects in the past where they looked and they said, oh, that analysis that we did, that discovery that we did didn't seem to be very helpful. So now going forward, they're kind of skeptical of it and they think, okay, we should just build faster, get rid of the discovery. When we're talking about strategy design, as we talked about yesterday, it's really all in the discovery space. So we definitely advocate that healthy and robust strategy or discovery is happening on projects. So an organization really needs to buy in and understand the value of discovery in order to have strategy design be successful. Anti-pattern number two, and this is actually number three, and this is actually really closely related, I found, with anti-pattern number three, is this waterfall mindset. And we often find that organizations that have historically done a waterfall approach are also organizations that are skeptical of discovery. A lot of times because their waterfall projects haven't been successful, and they look at this upfront discovery and they say, oh, it wasn't really helpful to having a successful project. So one of the reasons why folks who do agile work or continuous discovery work know is that doing discovery kind of quote unquote upfront is not a really effective way to do it. Continuous discovery is the concept that we're doing. Discovery isn't an event that happens, and it's definitely not an event that happens up front. It's something that's happening continuously. So this is something, again, coming from a waterfall perspective, that is kind of a pattern that needs to be taught, or a concept that needs to be introduced to organizations. Continuous discovery, by the way, is, I think I have it here. I do. There's a fantastic book called Continuous Discovery Habits by Teresa Torres, who's a product management coach. And she talks about all kinds of fantastic ways that you as an organization can be consistently and constantly doing customer discovery to get information and feedback about what's working for them and what isn't. A few concepts is doing ongoing interviews and feedback from customers and users, prototypes where you can build something quick and inexpensive and get feedback on what works for folks and what doesn't. And defining and monitoring success metrics after go live. This is actually a really big one, that it's an opportunity that we see folks don't take advantage of. But once a feature goes into production, doing a retrospective, but also being really thoughtful about how you monitor the success of that feature. So what did you expect to happen? How much were people using it? What metrics did you expect to go up based on, or go down based on this particular feature? And then monitoring against those expectations to see where it worked and where it didn't. Really big opportunity for a lot of organizations. So this idea that discovery happens all the time, and not to say that it's happening, folks are just constantly spending all their time on discovery. A lot of these methods are sort of lightweight ways to do discovery continuously while delivery is happening. And then anti-pattern number 4 is technology first and process second, or sometimes we say technology first and process never. As folks who work in Salesforce know, kind of the way it should work is process first, requirements first, figuring out what the underlying fundamentals are first, and then building technology to address that, not vice versa. Salesforce and all our technology tools have so much to offer, so many features. It can be really easy to just focus on the feature and kind of forget about the process and forget about the requirements. When we have a process first mindset, we're much more likely to have success and to build a strong foundation where we can bring new features to bear and solve the problems that our organization needs to be solved. I'm going to pause there for 1 second and ask, before I move on to some techniques, do you have any thoughts or questions or anything to add?
So far, so good.
So far, so good. Okay, that sounds great. All right, so we talked about the benefits of strategy design. We talked about some of the challenges of introducing strategy design to your organization. Now I'm going to talk about some techniques for introducing strategy design to your organization. And all these techniques are coming from the perspective of somebody who's working on a Salesforce team, and somebody who probably doesn't have the mandate to make major boil the ocean types of changes, and needs to make change gradually, kind of get buy-in from various people. So these are very what I would call kind of lightweight concepts. So you can introduce these strategy design concepts, get some wins, get some people behind it, and build over time. So none of these are like stop the presses, we're going to change everything today and completely transform our process. They're gradual and iterative. So technique number one, the first thing is to tie strategy design to your organization's core challenges. So one of the things, I'm a big fan of the strategy design methods. I think they're really cool. I think they're a great way to work. It would be very easy for me to kind of talk to organizations about all these great methods and why they should be using them. Journey mappings, how might we statements or whatever. But at the end of the day, an organization, particularly an organization that's not familiar with the concept, really is going to need to hear about these concepts and understand them in terms of how they can improve what they're doing today. And in particular, thinking about what is on the mind of the organization as their core challenges and how organizations can help. So when I work with organizations, what I find is every organization has history, okay? And you find over time that organizations sort of have stories or scripts about things that have happened in the past, and they're really kind of on their collective mind about what they do well and what they don't do well. So for instance, organizations that in the past haven't had successful kind of Salesforce implementation projects, they have sort of project failure on their mind as something that has happened and something that they might not be able to overcome. That's one challenge. We see organizations that have launched projects, but their user adoption is really low or really limited. That's another thing that can be a problem for an organization. Or organizations that it takes them a really long time to gain consensus, build new features, and roll them out. So faster, more effective go-to-market or rollout. These are all kind of specific challenges that may ring true to you within your organization or within your consulting clients. And it's important to tie our strategy design methods to those particular things that can be improved, because when you're talking with an organization or working within an organization, folks are going to be much more receptive and excited to start trying these concepts when it's tied to the things that on a day-to-day basis they're trying to improve within the organization. Okay, number two, always be clear about desired outcomes. So in our example before about the sales process and low engagement in the middle of the process or during the nurture process, improvement of the engagement in the middle of the process, that's an example of an outcome. Okay, that's something as an organization, across the organization, and even externally to our clients, we can all look at that and understand what that is, see the business drivers behind it, and understand why it's important, separate from any features that we build, separate from Salesforce, separate from how we're going to solve that. And what we find often is organizations have a discussion or a focus on outcomes for a very brief period of time, and then they quickly pivot to the features that they're going to build. So in our example above, improving the middle of the sales process, we might decide that our way that we're going to solve that is to implement Pardot or increase our use of Pardot, increase our use of engagement studio programs to send more automated and better automated communications to our customers. One of the things that we really coach organizations on is to focus on our outcomes throughout the process. So in the example of our our middle of funnel, framing it always throughout the project and at all times in terms of that outcome, our middle of funnel engagement process, and not in terms of the technology or features. So a lot of times we'll see a project that's called the engagement studio project, and it gets everyone focused on engagement studio in Salesforce, in Pardot, a particular feature that we're building, and it gets us away from the outcome that we're really wanting to move the needle on. And that's a subtle thing, but it's really important that we're focused on the end result, which is the outcomes. One of the other pieces that I mentioned with, for example, how might we statements is we're making what we call hypotheses about the best way to achieve those outcomes. We don't know when we build a feature if that feature is actually going to address the outcomes that we want. It's a hypothesis, it's you could say an experiment, and we're going to test the results of that experiment with prototypes, or ultimately with when the feature goes live and we see what the results are from it. But it's really important to always be conscious of our outcomes and the end result that we're driving toward, and be a little bit looser with what the particular features are we're building, because the feature at the end of the day is just a means to an end. It's not the end itself. And then technique number 3, this one is a little bit more targeted. We talked about journey mapping and the fact that we're considering multiple perspectives, salespeople, sales management, prospective customers, existing customers, etc. And also we're considering not just the stages and the process and the action and the functional aspects of that process. We're also considering the thoughts that people are having as they're going through that journey, the feelings or the frustrations or the things that they're feeling really good about during that process. And that helps us to uncover a few things. Number one, what is the core problem or challenge that people are experiencing with the current state? And 2, it helps us to uncover potential opportunities for how we can improve on that situation. This is something we went over yesterday, but this is an example of high-level example of a journey map. And this is from Trailhead, the journey mapping trail. And it just shows the 7 dimensions of a journey map, which are stages or phases, actions, thoughts and feelings, which I just talked about, touch points, context, and opportunities. So I won't go into each of those again, but just to know that when we talk about journey maps, we're not just talking about functional steps. We're talking about thoughts, emotions, things that happen with Salesforce, things that happen outside of Salesforce, larger organization, and even societal context of things. So bringing some of those concepts, whether you do quote unquote journey mapping or not, even if you're doing process diagramming, bringing some of these journey mapping dimensions to your business process mappings can be very powerful. And the last technique that I wanted to call out is how might we statements. So how might we statements are what I would call a very lightweight methodology or lightweight tool around brainstorming different ways to address a problem. And again, what we see with a lot of organizations is the thinking and brainstorming about how to potentially solve or address customer or user needs is kind of a closed and informal process. So leadership might say, hey, we are going to introduce Pardot, and we are going to introduce more automated messaging to improve our middle of funnel engagement. And that process for identifying the solution, Pardot, oftentimes is informal. It's not based on data. It's not based on really deep feedback from customers or users. It might be a hunch, it might be what competitors are doing, it might be something that somebody in leadership saw happen somewhere else. And it's really important to bring a little bit more structure, a little bit more openness, and a little bit more outcome related thinking to the process of brainstorming possible solutions. So how might we statements are really, I'd say, easy way that organizations can do that. It doesn't require, people usually get the concept of it, and it's something that people often find fun doing in a session where people are sitting around the table and doing post-it notes of how might we statements, or you putting it on the whiteboard. It can be an open and empowering process that organizations like. So that's a great technique to think about starting with as you're beginning to introduce strategy design at your organization. So questions and answers. Amit, curious if you have any questions or feedback in terms of what we went over today.
Your presentation was crystal clear. So to be verifying, I don't have a specific question. Most of the doubt which I was having, you already covered.
Yes, one question for you, since you weren't on the call yesterday. You're familiar with business analysis concepts, I know, and I'm curious to what extent you think the strategy design concepts overlap with business analysis, or you think they're different, because that was a hot topic yesterday when we talked.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of things when it's come to the business planning. It's lots of stuff meet each other. Especially, I'm talking about the agile concept. But apart from that, like when it's come to the strategy is more on business standpoint. Business, I mean to say financial stuffs. But the business analysis is actually come little bit more around development side and requirement gathering part.
Yeah. That's one of the things that we talked quite a bit about yesterday. The fact that business analysis is kind of focused on requirements and in that stage of the process, and whether or not kind of how requirements as part of the delivery process fits into discovery, and where they intersect and where they're different. So
exactly.
great.
So once you can say the management part the management is overlapping, especially the agile management kind of thing. But apart from that, they both are work with the different kind of like you can say the strategy might be work a majority of the time with the C-level people. I mean to say CXO level peoples, and when it's come to the business point, business actually BAs actually work on business stakeholder. So business stakeholder is not who is responsible for the financial stuff, that actually give you the business requirement.
Yeah. And one of the things too, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, and I think it's really important, is even if your BAs or your whole kind of Salesforce implementation or development team is kind of sticking within that delivery part of the process, where they're really focusing more on functional specs and architecture and the implementation side, there are still often a lot of opportunities to bring them into the strategy design and the discovery type work, and to share information, so it's not just a really siloed approach like I talked about before. So this isn't to say that every person, what I want to say is, we're not advocating that necessarily everybody is in every single strategy design or customer interview session or something like that. But it is to say, even if you are kind of keeping the roles and responsibilities that you have, a lot of times there's opportunities to share information around some of these customer user discovery information interviews, and share that across the organization, so people are more informed when they're doing the delivery, and they understand more kind of qualitatively what a good solution looks like. Cool. Well, Amit, do you have anything else before we wrap?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you so much for such a great presentation, Brian. You cover lots of point. I hope our audience will be like it. So I will be suggest them look into this. And if you have still more question, feel free to reach out to Brian on his Twitter handle or post the question on our recording part into our comment section so that we will get back to you to answer them.
Great. Thanks a lot, Amit. This has been
Thank
great.
you.
Thanks for having me.